Hello everyone and welcome to our 10th episode of the Warhoundcast. I'm joined by Denis.
Hello.
And Nathan.
Hello.
And this week we're taking a look at the new Necron book. Just having a sort of overview of it, what's cool, what they're doing better in 9th, comparing them a little bit to 8th, and all fanboying probably over how cool the new Silent King model is.
Yay!
It is a cool model.
I am literally in the middle of building it, and it is ridiculous.
How tall is it? Because I haven't actually seen it in the flesh yet.
Well, I don't know, because I've spent the last 45 minutes building what looks like 3 engines that go on the bottom of the chair that he sits on. It's like you're building the thing inside out, and you're almost building every single component, even if you're never going to see it. It is a bit bizarre.
It's one of those models that's going to show up in so many like dioramas as much as anything, just with that sort of raised platform that you could have a word bearer shouting something off with the right conversion or whatever. And then you've got I'm not a massive fan of like the Catan head at the top, but like everything else about it is just absolutely incredible. And it's one of those models that even though I've never collected Necrons in my life, I really, really wanted my collection.
Yeah, it's very cool. They really pulled it out of the bag, that one. I mean, it's a centerpiece, right? And it really looks like a centerpiece. Even if it never gets played, it's still going to be an amazing model. And I think most Necron players would love to have it in their army regardless.
Yeah, shall we start with the Silent King then? Because he's right at the back of the book. It seems like a reasonable place to start, given we're talking about him already. Actually, firstly, I wanted to check something, Denis. Not that there was a massive amount of Necron players in 8th, but you were certainly the most regular Necron player at our club. I think the only Necron player at our club. But were you the top Necron player at the last LGT?
Yeah, I believe so. According to BCP, yeah.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was out of 8. So it's not saying a huge deal. But I think at one point it did make it to these dizzying heights of 18th table, or maybe 14th table. And then got knocked down by some knights that got the first turn and proceeded to wipe out half my army before I could do anything. But yeah, I mean, contrary to popular, I think they weren't great in 8th, but I really enjoyed playing them. I stuck with them, and I did reasonably well. I think I usually won maybe like 60 to 70% of my games.
Yeah, because you won an iBuy War Games tournament with them, didn't you? I think you won the last iBuy War Games with them.
Yeah, that's right. I think so. Gosh, it seems like a long time ago. Yeah. And I almost came second at the last confrontation before lockdown, but because my painting score wasn't as high as the couple of people behind me, I got knocked down to 4th place. But in terms of the actual battle score, I would have come second. So yeah, but they were like a one-trick pony, weren't they? And there was like one thing: you had your opportunity to alpha strike somebody and cripple them, and if you did that, things are good. If you didn't, then you're probably not going to win.
Yeah, you kind of had that in a lot, because I went to a lot of tournaments with you, and like the after game chats was very well. They got first turn, so I died, or it was I got first turn and I obliterated them, kind of thing.
Yeah, that kind of how it felt a lot of the time.
And I think a lot of competitive Necron builds the core of them was virtually identical, and it stayed that way throughout the whole codex. Whereas something like you look at Elder and it started off as Unari, and then it went to Planes, and by the end it was going into sort of solo heavy weapons with expert crafters. They sort of changed as the meta changed. Necrons felt in 8th very much that they had the triple Doomsday Arc, triple Plane, some Immortals and Season to Taste for the rest. They felt very sort of static over 8.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'd go as far as saying that after the whole triple Tesseract Vault got nerfed into the ground, because that did do well, and there was a silly list, right? Nobody wants to play against something like that, and nobody really wanted to play with
about
it.
That.
It was ridiculous, but it was the only cheesy thing Necrons could do. But once that got nerfed into the ground, yeah, I'd say like 80% of the list was fixed, and then the remaining 20 was sort of personal touches. But yeah, you had your 3 Doomsday Arcs, you had your 3 Doom Scythes, usually at least 1 unit of Destroyers, and a bunch of Tesla Immortals. And then whatever points you had spare after that was the sort of the thing that people added in.
Denis, how do you think Necrons will play in 9th compared to 8th?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because in 8th, they were entirely like an Alpha Strike army with mostly just firepower. And I feel like in 9th, there's been a lot more focus and emphasis on combat. All the good new units are all combat focused, or most of them. Lots of the new rules and just sort of army mechanics and synergies, they're all combat focused as well. So I think that'll be a nice kind of breath of fresh air for the Necron army, that there's actually some good choices around combat units and having that component in the army. That'll be cool to see. And also maybe back to having some Necron warriors, and like big blobs of Necron warriors, might be, I don't know if they're going to be good, but they'll be better for sure. So
yes.
That's going to be good to see as well.
Yeah, because they basically weren't ever in a 8th edition list, were they? You took Immortals exclusively as troops.
Yeah, like Necron warriors were just terrible value for the points, and everything just killed them by looking at them, and then you lost the entire unit without it doing anything.
Well, speaking of close combat armies, we've been joined by Leo, who has had to replace Nathan. And Leo's, of course, well known as being the combat expert of our group.
Yes. Yeah, my specialty is up close, real in your face combat. Really getting stuck in. No, Euan is being horribly sarcastic. I play Ultramarines, so very used to standing and shooting quite literally, and just trying to gun my opponent off the board. But unfortunately, actually no, I think it's positive. No, 9th has changed that, so that they're trying to move away from the standard castle army and make the play more adaptive and more harassing, which is good. Yeah.
Yeah, Leo's idea of combat was to fall back and shoot the thing that attacked them.
Yes. Well, it's funny because towards the end of 8th, I was finding that the majority of my firepower, say for example, intercessors, were better than most combat options that other armies had, because of the buffs you could have with the banner and Gilliman and other various buffs. They pumped out like 5 or 6 attacks if you buff them in the correct ways on the charge, which is really something when you've got reroll hits and ones to wound. It suddenly becomes a big threat when you've got a blob of 10 in someone's face. It's not what you want to be doing, but...
Are you turning a Necron review into an Ultramarines podcast?
Oh no! I was given some questions. I answered them. Okay, I'm not saying the Necrons are the worst faction. They are, but I'm not saying it.
I would probably agree in 8th, but not in 9th.
Yeah, no, I think they're very strong in 9th.
And I do. The last thing I promised, we'll talk about Ultramarines. But I do find it funny that Leo views Ultramarines as the shooting faction when they're typically the all-round faction for Marines. Yes. But there we are. So, shall we head back to the Silent King then? Because he's the centerpiece of the new launch. He is, as we said, probably the coolest model GW have done in a long time.
Yeah.
Other than the Void Dragon.
Other than Gilliman.
Oh. Okay, Ultramarines are banned for the rest of the episode.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Actually, yeah.
Big Daddy himself.
But yeah, no, the Silent King looks very, very scary. Dennis showed me a few bits on him, and I've seen obviously the releases online, and just the sheer amount of abilities and stacks that he has and can give to other units is just phenomenal. For what? How many points is he, Dennis?
He's like 450.
450. But that's just something that's insane to me. That for 450 points, yes, he's like over 10 wounds. You can target him, but he has those pillars, correct?
Yes.
Which are basically
Yeah.
bodyguards.
And he's actually got the right amount of wounds to be hidden behind obscuring terrain still, which is a very big thing. So
yeah.
And he's got
the model itself is about like I that's one of the reasons I want to build it and see it for myself. I think you should be able to hide it behind most reasonably sized ruins.
Yeah.
And
yeah, the pillars are separately costed like 80 points each.
No, it's all included in the.
Oh, it is. Wow. Okay. How many can you take?
You get two of it.
You get two.
You get confused
with
the
no
terrain
flexibility.
piece.
Right.
Yeah, you might be thinking about the big monolith thing, not monolith.
Maybe because I remember from what I read, it's basically like the things that you get with him just basically add more wounds onto him. Well, I know they don't do that exactly, but they may as well.
Yeah, you're essentially right that he starts off with everything, and as he degrades, he loses auras and things, which is a very cool thing.
Yeah.
I mean, they have their own stat line, but they are part of his unit. Yeah. So it's like they count as individual models within the unit, but him and the pillars make a single unit. So
I see. Like I know we promised not to speak about Ultramarines, but like Marnius and his two guards, right?
No.
Those
are three separate models. It's almost more similar to like a patriarch and the familiar, but even that's not a valid comparison.
Okay.
But what I think is really cool about they're separate models as well. I don't think they even have to follow her around. This is one stat block for all the things for the Caesarean, for the pillars, and for the two chaps. Oh no, the pillars are separate. Sorry.
The pillars are separate. Yeah, so they are like bodyguards. They're part of the same unit, but they're individual models. They just can't move away from him.
Oh, so I was right with the Marnius analogy.
Don't know.
But yeah, no. Regardless, he's
the pillars are certainly bigger.
Yes, they are definitely. But I think regardless, he is a very, very cool model, and I think moving forwards, Lords of War should be more like him because what are they called? Sorry, the two Chaos Primarchs. What are they called? Magnus
Mortarion and Magnus.
Mortarion, yeah. Those two are very, very cool models, but they're so limiting in what they do. They're so expensive, and they don't have the flexibility that the Silent King does. Because the Silent King does everything.
I don't know about that, man. I don't think I agree with you. I think Mortarion is a ridiculously good model.
Whenever I've come up against him, I've just been like, it's Mortarion. Well, I suppose I've always had a lot of shooting behind me, so it's just like, I'm just going to gun him down. Do you know what I mean? I've never had it as an issue.
I think the Primarch comparison is very interesting because they're a similar price range. Yeah. If anything, I think the Silent King is more in common with Magnus. Mortarion, in a lot of purposes, is a big beat stick that runs up and hits things. He has some aura buffs, but that's not really his role.
No.
Magnus, although he's a Psyker, which is the complete antithesis of the Silent King, is more similar in the fact that he throws off buffs. He can pick units to do certain things. He can debuff units. And he's still a massive combat threat.
Yeah.
The Silent King is kind of a mixture of both. He has a lot of aura threats. He has shooting threats, which none of the Primarchs do, including the one we can't mention because he's in blue.
Yeah.
Or
green.
And he has a very nasty melee profile, and he has a bunch of really awesome tricks as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons. I mean, first of all, he has got to be a model with the longest set of rules that GW has released today.
Yes,
it is literally a page of rules. But
and they're all at different times as well.
Yeah, exactly. And they all degrade differently as well. That's the thing. It's a bit.
You should be able to buy a separate set of data cards just for him.
Yeah. But this is one of the cool things about him is that he is a little bit of everything. And I think the jury, personally, I think the jury's still out on him. I think whenever you have a single model that's that expensive, because it's not like he's indestructible, right? Like he's got a 4-up invuln, so if you can kill a knight, you can kill him.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of armies that can kill a knight in one turn, and he's actually got in total slightly fewer wounds. Oh no, slightly more. He's 26 wounds. So it's almost like killing a knight.
Yeah.
Except he's lower toughness.
He's low toughness.
7.
He's toughness
He
7.
does have the advantage that there are less things targeting knights and things of his ilk.
Yeah, I think that's one thing
8.
that that's exactly what I was about to say. From what I've seen and played of Ninth, it's a lot less heavy weapons focused, and I could quite easily see things like tanks or large vehicles or knights just being abolished, at least for a while, because it's like when I played against Denis, I had 2 repulsors, and that's basically a knight and a half because they've got an invuln, but I lost by a country mile because I didn't have any points. I had no points. I couldn't leave my starting area because I was repressed. He kept on harassing me. Sure, I was killing loads of his stuff, but that wasn't getting me points. So I really don't think it's about who has the biggest gun anymore. So I think if you surprise someone by bringing on the Silent King, who, yes, is a big gun, but he also has the ability to push up and take the center field, which is going to gain you points, he can be a very, very influential model.
Yeah, I completely agree. But I think like for me, it's going to be all about how much can you get him to synergize with the rest of the army. And his rules suggest that he should be really good at that. That's kind of his whole thing, right?
Why he does everything.
All these aura buffs. But one thing that hasn't changed about Necrons is they're very expensive. In fact, I'd say more expensive in this codex because you're paying a lot of points for durability and being able to fit in enough of combat elements and shooting elements and objective holding elements and the Silent King. I think it's going to be really hard.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I think a lot of armies are going to have that issue.
Yeah, unless you play Marines.
I do. Yeah, I do.
No Marine talk. We've banned Marine talk.
Okay.
It's actually an interesting thing because the Silent King is he's undoubtedly very powerful. I think the question is, what is the rest of the list around him? So do you look at him and think this is my combat threat, or do you look at him and think this is part of a combat threat?
I think it would have to be part of.
Yeah, do you know what? Like, I haven't tested it yet, so I will do. But I think one of the best ways to run the Silent King would be to surround them with like 3, maybe 4 blobs of 20 Necron warriors with a bunch of cryptex to give them all invulns and bring them back to life. And because you're re-rolling hits in shooting, and you're re-rolling wounds in fighting, and because he's a dynastic agent, you can take him in any dynasty. So you take them all as Novok, which gives them the combat dynasty, right? So they can get an extra AP in the turn that they charged, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And so all of a sudden, your 20 Necron warriors can punch really, really well if anything wants to tag them. And whatever does tag them near the Silent King's fighting last anyway. So between like 60 warriors, you can kill most things when they're re-rolling all hits.
But then how many points is 60 warriors?
Well, a lot. Yeah, I mean, now you're 20 warriors is like 260 points. So
you've already blasted like half of your army,
Yeah, more than that. Yeah. But then that's a really solid base, right? That's
100%.
I think if you're going to run them, that's how you would have to run them.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're not going to get enough value out of all the buffs he's giving out.
Necron warriors also have Gauss rifles, correct?
Yes.
Well, now they have a choice of 2. Yeah, you can give them the 24-inch guns.
Yes.
Or you can give them the 12-inch assault 2 guns, which are actually really good. But
which I'm assuming you'd give them in this build, correct?
Yeah, probably a mix.
I was going to say, is there a points difference between them?
No.
Okay, well there you go.
Yeah. The other good thing about the Silent King is that he is the only character. In fact, I think he's the only model in the game that interacts with Trike Praetorians.
Yes.
In that he can buff them, and that is good because Trike Praetorians are really, really good now.
Which ones are they? Is that what you brought against me, Dennis?
No, I didn't.
They are
bring
the
those
jump pack equivalents.
That's
so,
right. Yeah.
The Assault Marines would be their closest Marine comparison.
No Marine talk, Euan. Come on.
Raptors would be their closest Chaos Space Marine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they're really good because they have a shooting attack, which is only short range, but they are pretty good in combat. And being able, so if running them, you're getting the benefit from their shooting and their combat, and that makes them really powerful.
Were they always 2 wounds as well, or was that something new they got in this book, Praetorians?
They were always 2 wounds. So their defensive stats haven't changed. Their toughness 5, 2 wounds, 3 up save, but their damage output has gone up massively because all their the staff that they have, one of the weapons they can take, which is now really the only weapon that you should take. So they've gained an attack, so they're 3 attacks base, and the staff only gets 1 shot, so it's strength 5, AP2, AP3, and flat 2 damage, and it's the same profile in combat, but they get 3 attacks with it.
Pretty good. Like how much is a unit of what? 510?
So a unit of 10 is 250 points.
Jesus.
But that unit of 10 guys will be putting out 10 shots at strength 5, AP3, 2 damage, and then 30 attack at strength 5, AP3, 2 damage. And around the Silent King, they're re-rolling all of their hits to shoot, and they're re-rolling all of their wounds, which is the big one in combat because they're strength 5, so they will need that, which is huge.
Yeah.
They will kill anything.
Are they 3-up weapon skill ballistic, I assume?
They're 3-up weapon skill ballistic skill, but Silent King can buff them to a 2-up.
Oh.
So, I think that's what's so scary about them is that if you want them to, they're kind of quick, movement 10, fly. They can run off and delete something that's contesting something a bit further away. But if you have to engage them around the Silent King, when they are going to get to swing first with his with the Silent King debuffing the opponent to fight last, there's not a lot that can stand up to that, and then swing back in a meaningful way. It is a really scary profile, especially if you're a Chaos Marine equivalent.
So I have 2 questions, Dennis. So one of which is, apart from what we've already talked about, the Praetorians, what can you see being the biggest combos with the Silent King, whether that's just a single model or whatever? And also, can you see GW changing him in any way because he's underpowered, overpowered, or so on and so forth?
Well, it's hard to say because I haven't, played any games with him yet, and I think it's going to take a few different tries and builds to really find out. He looks on paper pretty well balanced to me. Like he's expensive, which is making you think twice about taking him in the first place. But
I don't think they can make him any cheaper.
No, and I don't think he should be.
No.
But any more expensive, you just never see him in an army.
That's true. I reckon you probably could squeeze him to 500. I'm not saying they should, but I reckon you could squeeze him and he'd still be competitive.
Well, the problem is then you don't have enough points to take stuff around them.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
Because as good as a model as he is, he's only worth those points because he's buffing the rest of the army. And so his value is going to be determined by how much other stuff you can fit in around him that's going to be good because of him.
Yeah.
So that's going to be really interesting to see. I think that's going to be good. But yeah, the big winners, I think, are going to be Warriors and Lich Guard and Praetorians around him.
We'll chat about Warriors because in some ways they haven't changed a lot, but they've become a lot more viable with just a couple of small tweaks. I think it's actually a really interesting case study of how that can happen. In the kind of a similar way that Grey Knights didn't change a lot during 8th, but they suddenly became very powerful with the addition of 1 or 2 rules.
Yeah.
And with Warriors, they got a sort of a side grade with the Ghost Reaper being added to them rather than just having the Flare, their rules changed as far as I believe the same, but reanimation protocols changed. And I know, Dennis, you really didn't like how reanimation protocols worked in 8th. I remember you sort of think it was a waste of points for something you never used.
Yeah, that's largely true. I think it was certainly a waste of points on Warriors. The problem with it in 8th, right, is that you never got the benefit of the rule. So the cost of the rule was embedded in all the units, right? So you paid your Warriors were actually quite expensive because the assumption was that you would benefit from their reanimation rule. But because it didn't kick in until the start of your next turn, if your opponent wiped them out, you wouldn't get to reanimate at all. So all of those points were wasted.
And that's through the attack phase and fight phase.
Yeah, so yeah, the entire opponent's turn.
Yeah,
and your own turn, in fact. And so
that's wow. I thought it was at the start of your turn. Wow, that's certainly something.
Yeah, so like let's say I would have reanimated at the start of my turn.
Yeah.
And then whatever actually, let's say I shot you, charged you, and then we fought in combat.
Of course.
You killed some of my guys. I can't reanimate. Then you proceed into your turn. You then shoot me, fight me again. And so that unit would have to survive all of that time to the beginning of my next turn for me to be able to reanimate them.
Yeah, that seems like a little bit of a mistake, doesn't it?
Yeah, which in a competent, like with good opponents, they just knew not to let that happen, and it wasn't difficult because
it was like Orcs when they what was it? They had to like squads of 80 and they could bring them back on the side of the board. It was like Green Tide. You knew if you didn't kill that entire unit in the turn, you were doing something wrong. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but the biggest change now is around the way the reanimations work. And the Warriors are by far and away the biggest beneficiary of that.
I think that's the point, though, isn't it? It's deliberate.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think GW just really tried to encourage people to play that kind of build.
Yeah,
and
but
also
you
like
said you were a little bit disappointed about because it's not the build that you were used to playing, right? Because you said that destroyers were affected quite badly by it.
Yeah, because basically the way reanimations work now is like it's really difficult to explain, right? This is why they have like half a page of text just trying to explain it. But it's sort of like a weird feel no pain type roll, but you do it on the number of dead models, and then you count the wounds of those models. And so, if you have a single wound model, you get to roll a 5 up after your opponent finish doing their attack sequence with a unit, whether it's combat or shooting, whatever. And then all the models that died from that attack sequence, you roll the equivalent in number of wounds for those dead models, and on every 5 up, you have to add up all the successful 5 ups, and then each sort of total number of wounds that would get your whole model back, you get a whole model back. So for one wound models, it essentially becomes a much better feel no pain.
But it's a very strange way of doing it. It's very strange.
It's very strange. I think it's super powerful on Necron Warriors or any single wound models, but on Necron Warriors because they also innately reroll 1s for their reanimation rolls. But for 2 wound models, it becomes really tricky because let's say you killed 3 Lich Guard. That would be equivalent of 6 wounds. So I would roll 6 dice, and out of those, I would statistically say get 2 5s.
Yeah.
And so that would bring 1 Lich Guard back, and then the rest are dead forever.
Yeah.
I mean, there are ways you can interact with it with some with the Resurrection Orb, but other than that, they're dead. And if you only got 1 5, then that's not enough to bring a whole Lich Guard back, so they all die. And so for 3 wound models, as you can imagine, it just doesn't work. Like you're never going to get 3 5s per dead model.
If you're killing them one at a time. If you kill 3, statistically you should get 1 back.
Statistically, you would get back 1 back if you kill 3, yeah. But like I was playing a game with Wraiths and Scarabs and things like that. Well, Scarabs are 4 wounds now, but with Wraiths and with Destroyers, you almost never get them back. It's just really, really hard. And when you do, you're getting one model back, so he's just going to get killed by the next unit shooting.
Yeah, it seems quite strange. I think it's hard for them to make a good way that it affects all units in the codex well and evenly without it being stupidly strong for one of the tipping scale, like multi-wound units like destroyers or single wound units like warriors.
Yeah, it's a really hard thing to balance without.
Sorry. I think it's a really cool way of doing it because they've got something that's very similar to Feel No Pain, but does feel very distinct from it. And I think a lot of a very minor gripe I have at some of the GW rules is when they want to buff something, is they tend to give it a Feel No Pain or an invuln, particularly with vehicles, to make something competitive, which I always think is a little lackluster. I think reanimation is sufficiently different from that. It's cool. I think the fact that it works really well with warriors and works better on warriors than anything else is great. I think when you look at the sort of the core mythos of Necrons, if you looked at what an iconic Necron army was, typically over the years in the sort of fluff, the lore, the background, it would be you've got some lords leading it all. You have a couple of monoliths, which are improved but still entirely forgettable, and you have this massive blob of Necron warriors. Our number is Legion, our name is Death, or whatever the quote is. If you think of the picture on the book of most of the Necron codexes, it tends to be a lord, and then there's a ton of warriors around him. So I think having something that the primary focus of reanimation working with warriors, with the literal core of this case of the army, I think is the right way to go about it, and I think it's a very cool rule.
Yeah, thematically I think it's cool. I like it. I think as a game mechanic, it's outside of one-wound models, it's not quite pointless because you still get some value out of it for two-wound models. But it becomes, so for 3-wound models and upwards, it becomes almost completely useless. Which, I don't necessarily think is a problem because, as you said, Euan, it's actually quite a cool way of trying to balance it. What I think they should have done, though, is to recognize that and not price in the survivability or the assumed survivability improvement of reanimation protocols into 3-wound models and up. Right? Because at the moment, say, like a Necron Destroyer is 55 points. It's like, that is a crazy amount of points to pay for a 3-wound model that's basically a 3-up save, toughness 5.
Considering the new ATVs are 80, 85 with a melter.
Yeah. So there are some really weird things.
Just trying to think of a sort of equivalent 3-wound shooty model. There aren't a lot of them in the game I can think of.
Obliterators, the Chaos models.
Obliterators are 4, but yeah, they're 4. They're
not Obliterators. Sorry, the newer ones, the newer Chaos models that came out with the was it the Phobos units they came out with?
They were Obliterators. They were Obliterators.
Okay.
Yes. Obliterators are 100 points each, with a more random shot profile.
What's an Eradicator?
About 7.
Yeah, it's toughness 5 and 3 wounds, so it's exactly the same defensive stat, and it has a better gun, a more reliable gun, and obviously you can buff them to no end with marine stuff, and it costs, what do they cost? About 50 points? No, less than that, because the whole unit's 130.
I'll have a quick check for you. They are 45 points a model. 50 points with a multi-melter.
Right, so 45. So they're 10 points cheaper.
Yeah.
And you can buff them in so many ways, and you can't buff destroyers in any way except for the 2 CP strat that only now.
I think that strat is very strong. Reroll all hits and wounds.
It's lost the hits.
Oh, has it?
It's gone up to 2 CP, and you can only reroll wounds with it. and it's on a gun that's random damage. So it's really not great.
I still think it's a powerful strat. It is immeasurably weaker than it was, but it was one of the most powerful strats in the game. I think it won, albeit in an army where it really needed a couple of powerful things.
Definitely.
The biggest problem, the problem with Necron shooting is we don't have any good shooting that is reliable as an army. Every good gun is random shots and random damage.
Yeah.
And I think the destroyers was as close as you get to a bit of reliable shooting, because you get to at least real hits and real wounds. But now you only real wounds, so it's less effective. It's 2 CP, which means it's actually quite pricey. And at the end of all of that, you still have to roll a D3 for the damage with no way of buffing it. And then
I think they should have made it a flat 2.
Yeah, in the meta when everything's at least 2 wounds, that's really hurts.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah, it's actually a really good point about how random Necron shooting is, because even their best units for shooting, you'd say historically, have been the destroyers and the Doomsday arcs.
Yeah,
and
unless you were spending rerolls, there was no way to control that outside of the Annihilation Protocol strat.
Yeah, and still isn't actually, and that's one of the really, I think, a big kind of missed opportunity that GW didn't correct for that in any way. Yeah, not necessarily in a profile, because it's always hard to balance these like huge guns that can one shot like a super heavy tank or do 0 wounds, and in most games they do about 4 each. And so it's really not worth their points, but they didn't do very well against a lot of damage. No, they have the potential for a lot of damage, but they don't often do a lot of damage. And I feel like the thing that could have done is maybe introduce like a strat, so it's not a given that they're going to guarantee to do some good damage, but if you spend resources on it, you can improve your reliability. That would have been, I think, good.
It'd be, just as a hypothetical, if they'd said a Doomsday Arc is a D6 damage weapon, if there'd been say it's a 1 CP strat and all it does is set the damage to 3, so it takes away that randomness. It's typically actually slightly weaker than average, but you do get that flat 3 for Marines. That would still be quite useful if you're shooting at something at Gravis armor, and it's theoretically a nerf.
100%.
I think the issue is if you look at something like that and then you look at a Repulsor which already has that built in, they suddenly go, well, now it just seems like we're bullshitting people. Do you know what I mean? I think that is the one thing when you look at vehicles in other armies compared to Chaos Marines. It's a bit of a shame, because obviously I play Marines, so it's good for me that all of their shit is so good, but when you compare it to other things like Necrons, who are a brand new army, they've been really supported at the front of night, they've got their codex with the Space Marines, and it's just like some of their stuff is just so unnecessarily underwhelming, and it's like, seriously, like I don't understand the point. It still baffles me a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, right? And it's kind of weird as well, because thematically Necrons are known for their like shooting firepower.
Yeah,
this is
and
kind of the
their
thing in the
accuracy.
lore. And they're supposed to have these incredible like technological advances and these weapons that nobody can match, not even Eldar. And what it materializes in the end on the tabletop is that you have a giant cannon that can do 1 shot and fails to hit or wound or do 1 damage.
Yeah,
and that's going to cost you almost 200 points.
Yeah.
To be fair to GW, the low-cost heavy destroyers do actually have quite a reliable profile, regardless of which gun you have.
They're also stupidly expensive money-wise. I just like to point that out. They are disgusting.
Yeah, I'm not sure they're good, but they are reliable.
Yeah, and you know what? When I first released the teasers for Doom Scythes, because Doom Scythes they've really, that was an example of them turning a powerful gun into what really is a powerful gun. Like, there is no 2 ways about it. It's gone from random D3 shots to flat 3 shots.
Oh, nice.
And it's gone from random d6 damage to flat 3 plus d3. So you're always doing a minimum of 4 damage and potential to still do 6 damage.
I've
so
always loved 3 plus D3. It's such a good profile.
Yeah, so you're guaranteed 3 shots, and you're guaranteed that any wounds you get through are going to cause at least 4 damage. That is the kind of profile that these big super heavy guns should have.
Oh, definitely.
But yeah, I when I saw the Doomsday Arcs didn't follow the same trend. I just don't understand it. It just makes no sense. And what's worse is the new Doomstalkers, right? Which essentially are Doomsday Arcs but on legs rather than floating barges. They have the exact same profile as a Doomsday Arc. Random shots, random damage.
Yeah, I think that they assumed that because the Doomsday Arc was in so many Necron lists throughout 8, they were just like, oh, it's fine, we don't need to touch it. But no, it was because they had access to such little else.
Yeah, there is
they
no
were
else.
running it.
Yeah, and Euan, like you were hypothetically saying about that, will they take lower average damage, or rather, not lower, but it's 3s, I guess, what it averages out to really, maybe just slightly lower. Would they take that guaranteed versus the potential for higher damage? Every time I would take that guaranteed.
That's fair enough.
So switching from weather very, very swingy, a lot of their meta units now, other than the Triarch Praetorians, do have fixed damage. But I'm not aware of anything that has a D3 profile for damage. And they got some really nice new melee units in all shapes and sizes, really. And I think actually what is the best unit or two is going to be a really interesting discovery for Necron players in the times to come. Because things like Lich Guard and Flayed Ones suddenly look more attractive. The Scorpec Destroyers, the melee ones, look quite good. Wraiths got a bit of a side grade, but are maybe still interesting. And the Katana, obviously, here as well.
Yeah.
And they're here to party.
So,
no.
This is hilarious, right? Because so first, actually, like this is exactly what I was saying at the beginning, right? That I think Necrons may well become a good combat army as opposed to a shooty army, which is really backwards. But their new combat units are excellent. They have really,
that
really good
Nightbringer
choice.
is just something else.
But
should we leave the Catan till the end and go for the other stuff first?
Yeah, okay.
Scorpec Destroyers are incredible. I think they're just really good. It's a little tricky to play them because they're not massively survivable, but they hit super hard and they're reliable because they reroll once to hit. They can reroll once to wound with the Lord nearby. They have a ton of attacks. They're all flat 2 or flat 3 damage. They all have good AP. They are like a really good example of a solid combat unit that you can rely to do work. Yeah,
they're a bit quicker than I thought they were as well.
Yeah, they're 8, right?
8.
So they're movement 8. Yeah. Problem is though that's pretty good, but of course there's like lots of terrain in 8th now. So you're often going through forests or craters or barricades and stuff like that. So they do get slowed down.
That fucked me the last time we played Denis so much. I just constantly, you were like, "You're in a forest." Ah, fuck. You're in a forest. Ah, fuck. Marty's moving like 2 inches. I do like just dislike it that a super soldier or an ancient like robot can walk through a forest and not just run through a couple of little trees. Do you know what I mean? It just seems a bit like just not right to me. It doesn't sit me right.
It's abstract, Leo. They're spending that time smashing through boulders and trees.
Abstract.
It's not the one tree that you've got on your terrain if you want a shooting gallery.
No, I know.
It's the smashing through the forest and things.
Yeah, exactly.
But I have to say, I really like the look of flayed ones in this new edition. I have to say, I've always kind of liked them. I'm not sure they're brilliant, but just as a sort of cheap, aggressive unit, I think they look quite good.
How many points today?
Yeah, this is what I'm just checking now because I remember thinking that they look okay, and then I remember looking at their points, and thinking actually not.
But they're 1 wound with reanimation.
So they're 13 points a model. So same as a warrior.
And I think they've got some strat support. I might be making that up. But they, they're strength 4 AP1, which isn't amazing. But if you have the right dynasty, they can be AP2 on the charge. They can get extra attacks. If they're near the Silent King, if you've got the right thing, they've got rerolling wounds. Maybe I'm overestimating them, but they just seem awkward to kill with that reanimation. You really have to focus on them, and yeah, I just kind of like them.
I think for 13 points a model, I'd be willing to focus them.
I was having to think about it, right? Because I think on paper they look like they could do the job of chewing through light infantry really well. The bit I struggled with is how do you get them there?
Yeah,
because if they come out of deep strike, which they can do, but then you're looking to make a 9-inch charge, or they get killed, and they're not hard to kill. So
Denis isn't very good at charging.
No, and if you're anything like me, then trying to roll 9 on 2 dice is almost an impossibility. So
also trying to charge 2 repulsors also isn't the best idea, is it, Denis?
Yeah, that's right. Because that will kill your wraiths.
Yeah. How many was it? 4? 4?
Killed 3 out of 4. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he still failed the charge.
And still failed the charge.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like a bitter moment at all.
No. Well, not for me.
Well, I can only just take from that it didn't affect the outcome of the game, so that's all good.
No, it didn't.
But yeah, flayed ones are good. I personally, I'm not sold on them, but I think people can make them work, especially like a Novok Dynasty or something like that. I think that could be incredibly brutal.
The other unit, and I'm probably choosing the wrong one out of the two. The other unit that I think's got a lot better in a melee role is the Canoptek Spiders. And Swarms are probably the better unit because cheaper, quicker. You can give them, you can give both of them objective secured in the right dynasty. And the Spiders are slower. But I really like the Spiders.
Yeah, I heard they're like 60 points, I think. I heard a few people talk about the Spiders. I think it's like one of those things that looks interesting on paper. I think in practice
probably is.
Yeah, I don't see them fitting into an army well. But if you can squeeze even one in around your warriors, around your scarabs, then you always have the potential to bring some scarab bases back, and it's a tougher body. So if anything tough charges your scarabs, you've got something that can actually counterpunch. Of course, you can give them a gloom prism, so your spider all of a sudden can be a denial of psychic powers.
That's stupid.
I think there's a weird off-meta list where you have a bunch of spiders in a sort of very Death Guard fashion, where you're just trying to deny secondaries and have these tough kill units that don't really give up anything. But I don't think that's probably a very good list at all. And I think there are better units, but I just kind of like the Spiders. Mostly probably because I like reanimating them in Dawn of War in the middle of an enemy base, but there we are.
Yeah, no, the Spiders are kind of cool. I like the idea of them. They have a lot of utility, and I think that there may well be lists where they work quite well. I don't know what that is, but because you can take them in up to 3 in the unit, so that would be 180 points for 18 wounds, toughness 6, 3-up save. Now, that's pretty decent.
I think I look at it in a similar way to how I look at the sort of the Wraith Guard and Eldar, in that they do something very different to the rest of the book. But I'm not sure they do it as well as other armies do it. So you compare them to sort of Beasts of Nurgle or Chaos Spawn or whatever. So I don't think you'd want to build a list around that. And if you're not building a list around them, then the opportunity cost is probably too high, to be honest.
Yeah, well, that was my view of them. If you have a spare 60 points left over, Well, actually,
Yeah.
if you have a spare 60 points left over, I would say I would spend it on some crypto thralls because they are amazing. But in fact, you were talking about flayed ones earlier. I think crypto thralls are infinitely better than them, as long as you can keep them near a cryptech. But yeah, they're massively good value for 40 points.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think the best Necron combat workhorse, shall we say, is a really interesting discussion, because you do have. I agree. I think the crypto thralls look great. They're cheap. Even if they don't do anything offensive the whole game, they'll probably just run around and complete a bunch of actions if you've gone for that, and be really cool. And we haven't even mentioned something like the Lich Guard, which has a different defensive profile as its sort of little niche.
Yeah, because Lich Guard's got. I mean, essentially, they have a Storm Shield now, so you always used to have a 4-up invuln instead of a 3-up, which was silly. It was just stupid that they had such a cool shield and it was less good than a Storm Shield. But they, in theory, get buffed now because now they get the +1 to their save. So it's a toughness 5 2-wing model with a 2-up save and a 4-up invuln.
That sounds pretty tasty. Yeah,
they're actually really good. The problem is they're only power swords, so they're not killing a huge amount of stuff. But they're definitely going to be surviving, some pretty substantial damage coming their way.
They are strength 6, which is not nothing. But being 5 to 6 isn't a massive differential. No. Basically means you're better against light tanks and very tough infantry.
Well, the difference is, yeah, the difference is the way I look at them is like they're almost like an equivalent of a Blade Guard. But if you run an equivalent number of points of Blade Guard into Lich Guard, Blade Guard win every time.
Oh yeah. I think that's more, again, trying to keep off this, but I think that's more of a strength of Marines than a weakness of Necrons. I think if you compared them to Wraith Guard, which are again a similar unit, they can have that invuln. I think they come off better. They would have the same invuln. The strength would essentially be the same. The toughness of the Wraiths would be higher, the wounds would be higher, but the Wraith Guard hit on worse because they have a -1 to hit.
What's the damage on their axes?
D3.
Okay, so that's a bit better.
But they are quite pricey. They are 50 points per model. No, sorry, 40 points a model. It's unit of 200 is unit of 200.
Sorry, what did you just say?
Unit of 200, yeah, is a unit of 200 is your opponent cheating massively, yes. but having a very cool army of Wraith Guard. But yeah, sorry, a unit of 5 is 200 points.
Yeah, that does feel a little bit steep.
Yeah, so that's interesting because I think that is that's definitely a much closer match. Because for 200 points, you end up getting like 6 or 7 Lich Guard. So that would be a really close match.
You'd have more attacks with the Lich Guard, hitting better.
This is no buff, right? We're just talking about straight out of the box.
Yeah. They would be wounding the Wraiths on 4s, assuming they have the swords. Don't need to worry about the scythe. Both of them would have the same effective save, whereas the Wraith Guard would have hit worse. They wound more often, and they have multiple damage potential. I don't know who wins that. It's probably if anyone's got any reasonable buffing characters nearby.
Exactly. I think it'll come down who got buffed more. Actually, the one
and that probably goes Eldar then, because Eldar have some great buffs that they can currently use on Red Guard. But
yeah, which again is like the really weird thing I found with the book is that individual unit stat lines are often okay to good, but there are lots and lots of limitations in how far you can push that through buffs and synergies.
It is weird, the core changes, because a lot has been made of how much a certain other book got with core compared to Necrons.
Yeah.
And it will be interesting to see if Necrons are the exception or if Marines are the exception.
But I think rerolls. I think that the larger that rerolls have an impact on the army, the larger the core radius is going to be. Because even losing rerolls on the tanks for Space Marines felt crippling. I don't think it is, but it certainly felt it when it happened. My heart melted, just a little bit. I almost had a heart attack, but I got over it. Just like when the big man himself got his reroll all wounds taken away, I had a small fit, just a small one.
Still have panic attacks about that one.
Oh yeah, full on PTSD. Don't you worry about it.
The one interesting thing I found as well, right, is that there is surprisingly, I think, almost a complete lack of any kind of defensive strats in a book, in the Necron book. I think from memory there are only two. One is the quantum shield, improved quantum shielding, which is very good. I think quantum shielding is a good change. It's not as thematic, but it is a better rule.
Yes.
And it's so now it goes up to a 4-up invuln instead of a 5-up invuln. And the only defensive strat on any infantry model is the Scorpic Destroyer strat to give a -1 to wound, which is quite good.
Yes. Having played Grey Knights a few times, -1 to wound can be really nasty. And it messes with a lot of synergies. Sorry, Leo. It messes with a lot of synergies you don't expect. So things like Shuriken rends on a 6+. There's not a lot of ways to modify it with an Eldar, so you tend to think of it as unmodified 6s. But if you have a -1 to wound on a unit, you actually can't use that 6s to rend them. Which is, if you're playing a Shuriken-based Eldar force, which you're probably not, but can be really nasty. And there are a lot of odd synergies like that you don't tend to think about. Sorry, I'm done.
I was just going to say, I think that's a short-term problem because if you look at the Necron and the Marine codexes, that they seem to have almost completely stepped away from unmodified 6s for anything.
Yeah,
it's always limited to stepped away from modified 6s. Everything's now unmodified. I suspect the same will be true for Shuriken.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised they haven't just gone out and done a change like they did with Plasma and say everything is on unmodified 6s. And on the odd case where they have there's a couple of, actually I can only think of one thing that wounds on a 7 where you get a +1, which is one of the Death Guard spells where you, on a 7-up, you do a mortal wound but you get +1. Why they don't just make that an unmodified 6. Because
Nurgle's number 7.
Pardon?
Because Nurgle's number is 7, that's why.
Oh, that's true. That's a good reason to keep it for Nurgle exclusively, and then make it unmodified on everything else in the game.
Yeah, because that would really piss some rule nerds off, 100%.
But that, the reason I brought that up because that seems to be like a weird. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but defensive strats are quite a big part of the game now, right? Because it gives you an opportunity to either react to what your opponent's doing or to kind of execute a strategy and buff a unit in advance, knowing that it is going to take some fire. Not having access to that is really quite painful. When you have so few units, that are so few that are so expensive, like they are in Necrons, so you really don't have any way of being able to kind of say, you know what, I'm going to put some resources into making this unit more survivable. You just don't have the choice to do that at all.
They do have quite a lot inbuilt on the data sheet. Reanimation protocols is one, living metal is another, and Necrodermis on the Catan. So you don't have that sort of reactive thing, but quite a lot of units do have a rule that in some way buffs their resilience inbuilt into the profile.
Yeah, but they're minor tweaks. Like it's not living metal isn't going to come into effect until the next turn, so it has zero impact on somebody shooting you right now. And as we said earlier, reanimation protocols is only good on single wound models. So I think given there is a trend that lots of other books have had, I was hoping it'd be something that we would get.
Because the Lich Guard lost one as well, didn't they?
They did, yeah. They used to have a really cool one with the shields, right? Where you improved their invuln save by 1, and they could ping shots back, which was really cool. And now they can't do that, which I don't mind, because I don't think 3-up invulns is a good thing in the game. So I'm kind of glad to see that go. So maybe they could have figured out another way of improving or of kind of introducing that buff in. But yeah,
they could have had +1 to armor saves or something, and if you roll a 6, then the shield's activated or whatever, and it does a thing. So they could have kept the spirit of the rule and done it in a different way.
Yeah, totally.
But should we move on to, apart from the Silent King, probably the most exciting, the most hyped part of the book?
No, let's not. I think we should stay away from it, actually.
The Catan?
I'm going to be controversial about it.
Okay, you go first.
I think they're overhyped.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. I think they are good. Like, don't get me wrong, and I've used it a couple of times, and I think it's very powerful. But it's incredibly expensive, and it's really slow, and it's only 9 wounds, so you only have to do 3 wounds to it in 3 different phases.
It does have living metal.
Yeah, but what if you're doing 3 wounds in a single phase, in a single round, then it doesn't matter. And so the few games that I've had with them, what happens is he usually kills something that's not quite his own points back, and then he's dead. Because by the time he gets where he's going, he probably already would have lost anywhere between 2 and 3 wounds, depending on. Well, usually you lose 3, you gain 1 back, so you're 2 down, and then your opponent basically just needs to take 1 off of him in Overwatch, shoot him, charge him, or if you charge them, they fight you back. So by round 3, he's usually dead. So yeah, I think there are better ways of spending 350 points, but I love them. Nightbringer is my favorite model. I will cram it into every list I can, just for the sake of taking him. What do you guys think?
Okay, the one slight disadvantage I have is I actually really don't like the Catan powers, because they all basically say do mortal wounds in a different way, which I think is a little bit of a shame. And I think they could have had some. They could have used them more like powers. They could have had some, something gets a reroll to wound, or something gets an invuln save, or whatever. Just various splashing mortal wounds, which Necrons actually do quite a lot of, for not being a psychic army, or have the potential to do, is a little bit of a shame. I think super cool, especially the 3 named ones. I don't think the Void Dragon's that good, and I'm not sure about the Ascendants either. But the two OG ones, the Shard of the Deceiver, I think is awesome and has some real utility, and adds a dimension that Necrons might not otherwise have. And the Nightbringer, just wow! If he charges something, it's gone. Which is a really nice tool to have. And the one other thing I think I'll say is, while they are only 9 wounds, I think Necrodermis, there are some armies that I just don't think can handle it. So while they aren't that tough in a traditional sense, there are some very, very focused armies that I just don't think can beat the Catan. So something like Blood Angels, where they only do damage in 1 phase, they have to chuck probably 4 units at a Catan to kill it, because they've got to do 3 wounds in 3 combat phases, and it's going to heal at least 1 of them. There are some armies like Thousand Suns or Eldar, which will probably smash it because they can do wounds in psychic phase, they can do wounds in shooting phase, they can do wounds in combat phase. But I think there are just some armies that these guys are just going to pretty much beat on their own.
So it's funny you should say that, right? Because I tested him against my Blood Angels, and I'll tell you exactly what happened. He lost 3 wounds just while he was walking up the board to try and get to my characters, because I think they're basically character killers, right? The Nightbringer especially, because their ability to ignore invulns and all feel no pains is incredible.
Very, very strong.
And so he's the perfect character killer. And so the Catan made it all the way to my little bubble of Blood Angel Death with some characters in the middle and about 20 intercessors, mixtures of assault and bolter guys. And then he charged into the assault intercessors, killed a grand total of 1.5 models, and then took 3 wounds back in combat. Then they fell back. He got shot with the intercessor unit, took 3 wounds from them. Then he got charged and died. So he was alive. So he, in the entire game, killed 1.5 intercessors and died.
The thing is, Dennis, how many points is he?
350.
Oh, wow, okay. How many points was he when you used him in the game against me?
165.
Okay. Because when I saw him on the battlefield, I was like, okay, he's a threat, and I put some firepower into him. I just very briefly pointed my repulsor at him, and he fell over. And I was like, okay, like these guys aren't a threat. But then I saw the new rules for the new guy, and I was like, holy shit. And I think you're using him slightly wrong. I think that he needs to be treated as, I think, yes, a character killer is the correct way, but not just a character killer, like an elite infantry killer. Like, I think he'd do very well against Custodes. Custodes. And anything would do like that.
Well, yeah, except so I look, I love the model. I think he's great, and I think his rules are great. But the thing that really hurts it, and there is no way of getting around it, is random damage, and he has no access to rerolls. So even
with the Silent King, he does, right?
No, he doesn't benefit from any rerolls or any buffs whatsoever. And so that's the real problem with him, is that you're hitting on 2s, unless somebody's transhumaning or has some other ways of stopping your wounding ability. You're wounding on 2s, but he only gets 6 attacks with no way of improving that further. So, like the way I roll, I'm going to miss 1 hit, and I'm definitely going to miss 1 wound. So you've gone from 6 down to 4. So at most, you're killing 4 models. And chances are, again, like I did against him, almost every game I've had with him, one of your wounds is a 1. One of your damage rolls is a 1, so you're not even killing that. So that swinginess, again, the random damage and no ways to buff the rerolls, is a huge, huge thing that I think prevents him from being worth the points, personally.
Yeah, I do see your point. I think it's a shame, and I think you may be being a little bit pessimistic. But I think that, like you said, 6 attacks. What's his damage? Is it D3?
D6.
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 Okay. So I think
if you charge him into a tank, he's going to one-shot a tank.
Yeah, but I think if you put him into something like Eradicators or Obliterators or actually, I know obviously forget the Overwatch, but lot of Tau units, battle suits, smaller things, so on and so forth. I think he does exceedingly well against things like that. He'd shred through a few Lehman Russ in a turn.
I think
the advantage of that is if you're playing Tau, you beat them anyway.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he's really weird. I think there will be games when he will do really well, and I think there will be games when he's not worth his points. So from like a competitive point of view, I don't think I would risk taking him, because the one time I'm going to need him to go and do something, he will fail.
Yeah.
And that's 350 points. He just did nothing.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Did you actually run Lightbringer in your LGT list?
I did.
Am I making that up?
Yeah. I took him in the LGT list,
Yeah.
and he was one of the kind of standout units. He did really well.
Mostly because I imagine no one knew what he did then.
I guess that was maybe part of it. Because he was a character in the true sense that he couldn't be targeted. The role he played then is he just hung around my backfield where all my firepower was, and anytime anyone sent a demon prince down there or any kind of big punchy character, he just went in and killed them, and he did that really well. And because he was only 160, well, at the time I think he was about 180 points. You could afford to have 180 points hanging around playing kind of a defensive position.
But you can't afford to have 300-400 points sitting in your backline doing nothing. Trust me, I know from experience.
Yeah, exactly. Because if I think most players who are competent, they're not going to get within range when he's going to do something, hurt them.
Yeah.
Because he only moves 8, so you just stay away from him and go and do what you need to do.
Yeah, do you know what? I know it sounds stupid, and I know that we try.
That you have to.
I know that we're trying our best not to talk about Space Marines, especially not Ultramarines, but he's 100 points cheaper than Guilliman. He seems to have a similar combat effectiveness to Guilliman, but he has none of the buffs. And I think there was a reason to have Guilliman sitting in your backfield, but it seems like you wouldn't want to have this 350 point weight in your backfield. And if what you say is true and he's too fragile to push up the board, then he does seem a little bit redundant.
Yeah, like I the way in every game I've played him so far,
I think
he's like a missile, right? You launch him at something, he will probably get there because he's not going to die in one turn in most games. He will, if you don't roll badly, he should kill the one. If you're targeting one thing, he will kill it. If you're targeting a unit, there is actually a really good chance he doesn't kill it.
Yeah.
Like even you're talking about eradicators, right?
Yeah.
Anything with 3 wounds on average, if you like miss 1 hit and 1 wound, then you're all of a sudden down to 4 dice. You could feasibly roll 2 1s and 2s in the wrong time, in the wrong order, and not even kill 3 guys.
Yeah, I do see what you mean.
I think what is he's a really awesome tool to have in the arsenal, though, and I think there will be meta shifts in the future, and if there is a case where there are demon primarchs around, there are knights around, it's probably overkill against a knight. There are these big tough models within Van Saves that you just need to go out and smash. He is going to be an amazing thing to put into lists.
Yeah, that's true.
If there is a sort of a horde to wound meta, he does have some problems with the D6 damage and the lack of rerolls. But if there does go into this giant monster build, he is just going to be amazing because he will, in a one-on-one with someone like Mortarion, he will beat Mortarion basically 100% of the time, excluding the sort of absolute fringe case scenarios. And I think having that power in the book, if not necessarily in every list, is a really useful thing to have.
Yeah, I agree.
Definitely. Yeah, I completely agree. And I guess what this is setting a precedent, right? Because I think when the Death Guard book gets updated, Mortarion, I would be amazed if he doesn't have a similar ability to limit the amount of wounds he can take in a phase. It seems to be like the new trend for these big scary models.
Yeah. Does the Silent King have that?
No.
Okay.
I don't think Mortarion will. If he keeps his film pay, I don't think they'd give him 2 abilities like that. I think
good point.
It's possible that they would say he loses feel no pain, but he has something else to that effect instead. As someone who has Death Guard and has a really awesome painted Mortarion, which I didn't paint because it's awesomely painted, him having both rules would seem a bit over the top.
And if you're saying that as a Death Guard
Magnus
player,
having something like that would be great. Yes. Yeah. I'm like, this unit is too tanky. I think one last thing to talk about is the dynasties.
Yeah.
Mostly, I don't know what you want to talk about on this, Dennis, but I want to talk about that 6-inch pre-game movement one.
Yes,
because
me too.
that one just looks so good. I mean, combine it with OBSEC seems like the obvious one. And there have been games where I've played in 9th where I have gone first as Death Guard. I have shot nothing. I have cast a psychic power that I don't expect to come into play. I've maybe done an action, and that's my turn. And I've been very happy with that. And to just do that as Necrons, regardless of if you're going first or second, just seems amazing.
Yeah, totally. I think that it's quite weird, isn't it? Well, I think it may be a sign of not a particularly well-written set of rules for the dynasties when the standout dynasty is not one of the original dynasties, but a custom one that you can make up. Yeah, it's so good. OBSEC, the combination of that and the OBSEC is just so powerful. And it kind of, that's pre-game 6-inch move really addresses a lot of some of the limitations of Necrons as well. So the shorter range and all of their guns gets you essentially end up being in range to hit with your guns or be in rapid fire range a turn earlier or a turn sooner. And then your, say, big punchy units like Lich Guard or even the Scorpeg Destroyers, you get 6-inch pre-game moves that can move you into ruins, into cover, get you further up the board. It's really good.
I mean, even on something like a Doomsday Arc, which doesn't have an apparent use for something like that, it typically wants to remain stationary. The ability to be like, cool, I'll put it in a ruin. It can't see anything. If I go first, it goes out of the ruin. Bang. I don't have to worry about its diminished profile on its moving thing. Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, you think if I play Alpha Legion, I'm quite happy to spend a couple of CP for 1 CP to move a unit, admittedly 9 inches, pre-game. That across an army of, 12, 15 units? Depending on how many characters and things you've taken. Yeah, it is really cool. I'm kind of glad that Necrons are the armies thus far that has it, because there are some armies that, if they had it, would just break the game. Like if you think of Orcs with that or something.
Let's not think about Orcs with that, please.
Yeah, it's really cool, and it's almost a bit Gene Stealer culty, being like, aha, I'm here. No, I'm over here, actually. Not quite to the same extent that Cult can do it, but again, it's pre-game shenanigans, and those have always been powerful.
Yeah, it's like the brute force version of a Gene Stealer Cult ability, right? Because instead of sneaky, we're just like, no, we're just marching up the board. We're here.
So why I was so confused when they gave Marines that the redeploy ability, because it feels like they're already so good at so many things. It's like, why do you want to give them something like pre-game sneaky? Do you know what I mean? I feel like they don't need that. It's not something that belongs in the army.
Agreed. I don't think you're going to find anyone arguing with that.
No. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I really love that that 6 move. It's very powerful. It's really good for the mission. I think especially in the way 9th plays, where being able to get to objectives and deny, board denial and zoning people out is so important. I really like it. And like one of the cool synergies that I found is that, say, the Wraiths, they lost their strat they used to allow them to advance in charge. But this is better because you're getting an auto 6-inch move. So you don't have to spend a strat. You're going to be 6 inches closer after you move, so you can charge if you want to with every Wraith unit, not just the one.
That's very nice. That is very nice.
Yeah, I think the thing is that you probably do always want that objective secured as your dynastic tradition, but you don't have to have it. And if you want to have +1 to charge, that works quite well with it. If you want to have a 6-up in run, that's a potential option with it if you've got the right kind of army. But yeah, it's a really wow ability, and it's a real draw to play Necrons because no one else has anything quite like it.
Yeah, it's really cool.
You could even, bring back a bunch of Tesseract vaults. I thought Tesseract was thinking of Marvel. I thought I was getting confused, but I wasn't. And just have them 6 inches up and be like, "Cool, come at me, bro." I don't think that's the best use of it, but
is there use of it?
They don't benefit from it because because they have the Catan keyword, which is one of the going back to my point about Catan's not quite fitting into their army. Like if you could move a Catan 6 inches up the board, that just made it a lot better. But they can't benefit from it.
Are there any of the main dynasties that stand out to you?
The 2 ones that I really like the sound of are Novok and Mefrit for obvious reasons. So Mefrit's the shooty one where everything gets an extra AP in half range, which is, again, in meta when there's power armor everywhere and storm shields on Terminators. Being able to get to -2 and -3 AP on your like average guns on your warriors, say, is really good. So that works really well, I think. And Novok is because, like we've been saying, it seems like the best thing about Necrons now is their combat ability, and Novok is the thing you want to have because it gives you +1 to charge and +1 AP on the charge.
Yeah.
So that's really good.
An 80 deep strike for flayed ones is not unreasonable odds if you're prepared to use the reroll.
True.
It's not something you'd want to swing the game on. If you're going
even
sort
things
of,
like, sorry, go on.
Yeah, even if you're just doing sort of a couple of sort of MSU things to go and harass people in the backfield, if you've got 2 or 3 charges that need an 8, one of them should come off, and you can that can just be very good.
Yeah, and it means that doing strategic reserves is now viable for your combat unit because you could have like, I don't know, 2 or 3 little 5-man squads of Lich Guard or even Scorpion Destroyers or anything really, and then you can put them down, and out of 3 of those, you hope that you'll make at least 1 8-inch charge. Again, not how I like to play my army because there's my other army that I play is Blood Angels, and the one thing that playing Blood Angels really teaches you is you never declare a charge that's less than 5 inches because you cannot afford to fail it. So you just don't take those chances. And that's how I would see that. I probably wouldn't rely on an 8-inch charge, but between that and being able to, get the buffs from Overlords, which give you like an extra +1 inch move and advance aura, all of those little things add up. So if you do have a combat unit or multiple combat units, over the course of the game, you will be able to get into combat quicker and more reliably. And of course, they also have really good synergies with various like command protocols, and there's some stratagems which can improve your AP and strength. So your flayed ones could be strength 5, AP 2, and 6s could be AP 3.
That's going to shred a lot of things.
Right? Yeah, when you're getting like 30 attacks, 40 attacks in a unit, that's pretty good.
Is there any other odd bits in the book that we haven't really covered that you want to sort of pick out? The last thing, we haven't mentioned dynastic codes in the slightest, but they're very cool as well.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about command protocols with their new mechanic, right? Which is like the bad version of doctrines.
I would say it's the cool version of doctrines where you actually have to think about it a lot more.
Do you know what? I wouldn't mind thinking about it. The problem I have with it is having. I find that it has just like one layer too many restrictions in place for it. Because obviously the fact that you have to try and anticipate the entire game ahead of time and lay your doctrines out, not doctrines, come on, your protocols out in the way that you think you're going to need them each turn, which is really tricky. Like I've tried it in a few games now, and it is really, really hard because games almost never go exactly how you want them to plan, and you're often having to react to what your opponent's doing, and that always causes you to think about, do you stick to your original plan just to benefit from the protocol, or do you actually do the thing that you think is better for the game? And the other thing is that the benefits they give you actually aren't all that great.
No, when you compare the doctrines, they're not.
Yeah, like they're pretty good, and some are better than others for sure. But they're really not game changing. Like it's a nice to have, but I mean, to be honest, I'm actually thinking that armies, I would be quite happy to sacrifice getting access to those and having 2 different dynasties mixed in an army to get access to relics, warlord traits, and stratagems for those dynasties. I think those are way more powerful than the protocols. And the third layer that they put in there is actually there are 4 layers, and the third layer is you have to have your at least 1 noble alive on the battlefield, and the only nobles in the game are lords and overlords. And in addition to that, the only units that can benefit from those protocols are those that are within 6 inches of a character and have that ability on their datasheet. So it's crazy. Like you by the time you put all of that in place, you find that if you want to get like a unit to go out and do something, like your Wraiths going and harassing a unit further away, or a unit deep striking behind the board or infiltrating, they're always going to be out of range of the protocols, and they're never going to benefit from them.
Yeah, I mean, they are just a strict buff on what they had before, which is always nice. But
it's a new ability, right? It's better than a punch in the face.
There's nothing that stands out as going, that's game breaking, or there's nothing where you'd go, these are a reason why I'd play Necrons over X. There are some nice things. The cover one's pretty good. The AP on a 6 is pretty good. They got 1 for shooting and melee for that.
The falling back and shooting, I think, is really good.
Yes. Is it falling back and shooting, or is it an action and shooting?
There's both. There's one that's an action. There's the action and shooting one is really good. That's come clutch in a few games, and I think Protocol of the Conquering Tyrant is the one of the, because they're all in 2 parts, and the second part of that is that you can fall back and shoot with -1, so it turns it into your Ultramarines.
Remember no Ultramarines talk, guys.
Just for you, Leo.
I'm the only one that's not allowed to talk about it. I love it.
So there's probably 3 good protocols, 4 good protocols, and you've got to get to them in the right turn whilst close to a character and for them to be relevant. So light cover if you don't move is really nice if you go second, but if you go first, you're probably not going to stay still. Yeah. But yeah, it's cool, and I do wish Doctrines had probably been a bit more like this. But I really get your point that you wouldn't, if you wanted to soup Necrons with other Necrons, I'm not sure this would be a compelling reason not to if you had a different powerful combo.
Yeah, like really, this is, I mean, I've only had a handful of test games so far, but they have never made a difference in any of the games. Not even just sort of like a little difference at all. So I'm thinking that it's not worth the sacrifice. Like, if you have a genuinely good reason to soup your dynasties in an army, which I think you would do, because you have such drastically different benefits from your combat armies and your shooty kind of elements, I think you'd get far more value out of it.
I think the CP cost of having a second battalion or having a patrol or whatever is probably more of a deterrent than having the protocols, which is a little bit of a shame. But
well, yeah, even like, so one thing I might do is, like, I like the idea of taking Saltec patrol, just so that I can take the Saltec unique warlord trait to give me regain CP on 5-up every time I use a stratagem. So you're spending 2 CP to do it, but over the course of the game, you're probably going to get a lot more than 2 CP back.
Fair enough. I think we shall wrap it up there. Thank you very much for the both of you for joining me, and for Nathan for his cameo, I think we can call it, at the start. Do you have anything to say before we go?
No, not really. I don't think so.
Yeah, I hope everyone's getting ready to bow to their Necron overlords.
We'll see about that on Thursday, won't we, Dennis?
Perhaps we should have an Eldar Necron grudge match for the start of the universe.
Good idea. Very good idea.
But yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you in 8 months or whatever we do another podcast. Bye.